The Nintendo 3DS was a strange little machine. It was a handheld built around a feature that half of its owners immediately turned off, including myself because it just gave me headaches. It came with a tiny circular analog pad that looked like it had been stolen from a microwave display, and it somehow survived long enough to receive several hardware revisions, including one that removed the 3D feature that the entire console had been named after to begin with. But despite all that, firstly, I love this console, it's fantastic, and second of all, the 3DS ended up with an enormous library.
So the system had Mario games, Zelda games, Pokemon games, Metroid, RPGs that took like 200 hours to complete, but one thing the system, outside of Mario Kart, wasn't really known for was racing games. Yeah, it had a few, but compared to other handheld systems like the PSP or even the Vita, there weren't really that many. You had arcade racers, an attempt to do simulation racing, some mobile conversions, and to me that all just seems a bit weird. And yes, this is my original 3DS XL, I've had this thing since it launched back in 2012, and it's definitely showing its age a little bit. The circle pad has completely worn off, and I haven't got around to replacing it yet, so that's my bad. But anyway, welcome to the weird world of Nintendo 3DS racing games. We're going to be covering 5 different games, and the emphasis there is definitely on the word different. So without further ado, let's jump into our first entry.
So when the 3DS launched here in Europe back in March 2011, Ridge Racer 3D was right there alongside it. The game offered its 3D visuals, updated drifting, vehicle customization, local multiplayer, and Street Pass ghost sharing, with its tracks spread across 3 main environments. Ridge Racer appearing at the launch of a new PlayStation system would have felt completely normal, but Ridge Racer appearing at the launch of a Nintendo handheld felt like it kind of turned up to the wrong party, but you know what? Mad respect for it, and it definitely still made sense. The series had always been good at demonstrating new hardware. Ridge Racer showed what the original PlayStation could do, Ridge Racers was one of the PSP's strongest early games, and Ridge Racer 3D had the important job of demonstrating that Nintendo's new screen could make cars look as though they were driving several centimeters behind a layer of plastic. And as a launch game, it does that job surprisingly well. The first thing that stands out is the presentation. It's not the best looking game on the system by any stretch, and some of the environments have this kind of empty early 3DS vibe to it, where everything is really clean, but also it's kind of been abandoned. Not quite sure on that one. It's as though every city in the game was evacuated 5 minutes before the race began. Anyway, regardless of that, the actual 3D effect is impressive. Obviously I can't show you that on screen now, but even so, the game still looks good. Now, the handling in this game is completely detached from reality, and I mean that as a compliment in the best way possible. You throw the car into a corner, tap the brakes or release the accelerator, and the back end immediately swings around. And that's fantastic. Once the drift begins, the car almost locks itself into position, allowing you to make some very large adjustments while travelling sideways. It's less like controlling a vehicle and more like negotiating with one. It does initially feel ridiculous, especially if you're not familiar with the Ridge Racer series or if you played anything recently that's remotely realistic. There's very little sense of weight, traction, or any grip. The cars operate according to their own set of physical laws, presumably written by someone who's only ever watched the newer Fast and Furious films. However, once it clicks, it's very satisfying. Now, the game has a strong selection of courses, although long-time fans will notice that a considerable amount of the game is assembled just from classic familiar Ridge Racer material. Tracks, vehicles, and music have all been reused or reworked from earlier entries, rather than anything being built exclusively for the console. So for a newcomer that doesn't really matter, but for existing fans it makes the game feel like a portable Ridge Racer compilation than a new chapter, but considering it's a launch title, I would say that approach was definitely the sensible option. It's still a great game, and speaking of great things, the soundtrack as always goes unbelievably hard. Now, in terms of critical response, this game reviewed pretty well. It holds a generally favourable review score on Metacritic of 75 out of 100, with the user score sitting just below that with a 7.3 out of 10, putting it just into the mixed or average realm. In terms of sales figures, it definitely wasn't the best selling game for the system, as according to VG Charts, this game estimated to have sold about 90,000 units, which seems surprisingly low for what I was expecting. If you own this game, let me know in the comments down below. Okay, so moving forward in time just a bit into the 3DS's lifespan, we are now looking at 3D Outrun. This was released on the European Nintendo 3DS eShop in March 2015. And of course, as I'm sure you can probably tell, this is an enhanced version of Yu Suzuki's 1986 arcade game, with the enhancements being it runs at 60 FPS, has a couple new songs, a stage select feature, difficulty settings, and even unlockable vehicle options. And despite often being called Outrun 3D, which I thought was its title, its official title is actually 3D Outrun. Of course, that's really important information that I'm sure someday will probably save your life. Now, of course, the original Outrun is one of the most influential arcade racing games literally ever made. I don't make the rules, that's just a fact. You drive a Ferrari across a series of scenic routes, weaving through traffic while attempting to reach the next checkpoint before the timer expires. Except in this version, it's not actually a Ferrari as far as I can tell because there's no licensing, but that changes nothing about how fantastically this game plays. So if you've not played this game before, you drive the car across a bunch of different routes, weave through traffic, and try and reach the next checkpoint before the timer expires. At the end of each stage, the road splits in two, and then you choose the route, which will determine the next environment you visit and eventually leads to a different ending of the game, and that's pretty much the entire thing. And it was brilliant, and still is brilliant to be honest. It's the kind of arcade game that just throws you straight into the action. It doesn't need like a whole career mode or anything, you just drive and enjoy it. That's the whole premise of the game. Drive a cool car, have fun whilst doing it, and hopefully also look cool whilst doing it. Much like in the original, the handling here is still simple, but it can get quite demanding. At lower speeds, your car is easy to place, but once you pick up to maximum pace, the steering obviously becomes a lot more sensitive. Traffic appears quicker, corners tighten without much warning, and a single collision can cost you your run because it takes up so many seconds. So basically, learning the routes is essential. What makes this version so exceptional though is the quality of the conversion. This was converted by M2, and they didn't just simply place the arcade game on the handheld and call it a day. The image has been adapted to widescreen, as I mentioned the frame rate is doubled, and the stereoscopic display gives the road a lot of depth. Again, I can't show you that, but take my word for it. The original sprite scaling already created a convincing illusion of movement, but here it's even better than it ever has been. The best part is, when this launched on the Nintendo 3DS eShop, it cost like £4, so you can have this fantastic game for the same price as a supermarket meal deal. So the game would go on to review very well with critics, with the 3DS version holding an 87 out of 100 on Metacritic, with a user score of 7.8 out of 10, putting both into the generally favourable category. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any sales figures because this was an eShop title, but hopefully it sold pretty well, because I would love Sega to make some more Outrun games, especially seeing as they're in the process of bringing back all these classic franchises like Crazy Taxi, so come on Sega, up your game. Now, moving on to what I would describe as a weirder title to put on a 3DS, this is F1 2011. This was developed by Sumo Digital and published by Codemasters in November 2011. It included the official drivers, teams, cars, and circuits from the 2011 Formula 1 season, along with Grand Prix events, time trials, challenges, a complete season, Street Pass functionality, and local multiplayer. It also incorporated the major rule changes introduced that year, including DRS. And on paper, this is the kind of racing game that the console needed. An officially licensed motorsport title with recognisable drivers like Hamilton, Alonso, real-world circuits, and enough options to create a reasonably complete F1 experience. It also occupies an unusual position within the Codemasters F1 series. The home console version of F1 2011 was a major production built around the tech established in F1 2010. The 3DS game is a separate interpretation by a separate developer, developed specifically for weaker hardware. Now obviously that was necessary, you could never cram the 360 version onto a 3DS because the 3DS would probably explode. So instead, Sumo Digital created a more compact racing game which attempts to preserve the major components of the sport, and I do respect the ambition. The execution isn't the best, don't get me wrong, The game is fun, and there is definitely a novelty to playing a Formula 1 game on a 3DS, but Formula 1 really is a kind of game that requires precision, and the 3DS doesn't even have triggers, it just has shoulder buttons. So it's kind of hard to get that precise turning, and it's the same with the circle pad. It's not a proper analog stick, and it's kind of hard to use for long periods of time for long races. But considering this is a handheld title, the options for your races are surprisingly flexible. There's different assists that can be adjusted, race distances can be changed, and you can modify settings including your tyres, fuel, and the weather. So it does allow the game to be a bit more accessible and on the arcade side, but still trying to attempt to resemble a simulation. The keyword that I use there is definitely attempting, because the handling is very unusual. F1 cars are supposed to generate enormous amounts of aerodynamic grip, but in this game they kind of feel like the tyres have been replaced with ice. You just slide around quite a lot. And especially in corners, correcting that slide is difficult because of that circle pad. It's not completely uncontrollable, don't get me wrong, and after practice you can definitely find a rhythm and start winning races, but it is quite hard to get used to. Now, the home console versions of this game reviewed very well, typically sitting in the 80% range, but unfortunately the jankiness of the 3DS version did not go unnoticed, as this one currently holds a 59 out of 100 on Metacritic. Definitely one of the lower reviewed games that we're looking at today. Now, supposedly the game went on to sell just under 200,000 copies, which is still pretty damn good going. Now, of course, I couldn't make a 3DS racing game video and not address the very large racing game that is exclusive to the system, and that is Mario Kart 7. It launched in December 2011. This was the game that introduced gliding, underwater driving, and vehicle customization to the series, and it contained 32 courses split across 8 different cups and had both local and online multiplayer for up to 8 players. Mario Kart 7 is like the least weird game in this video. It is polished, responsive, and clearly designed around the hardware. I just couldn't not talk about it when discussing this topic. But it is still a game where a caterpillar can throw a turtle shell at a gorilla while driving through a shopping centre, so normality is, well, relative. The basic structure will be familiar to anyone who has ever played a Mario Kart game in their lives. You choose a character, select your engine class, and compete across groups of 4 courses. You collect items from boxes on a track, and you can attack and defend your position or recover from mistakes. You know Mario Kart, I don't need to explain this to you. As I mentioned, the most important additions are gliding and underwater driving. Certain ramps deploy a glider, allowing the kart to travel and glide through the air. You can adjust altitude and direction, potentially using air currents, or find alternative routes to gain that victory. Underwater sections change the kart's wheels into small propellers and alter the handling. Neither mechanic completely transforms Mario Kart, but it does give the tracks much more variety. And these ideas became fundamental to later entries such as Mario Kart 8. The new tracks are all pretty damn good: Daisy Hills, Shy Guy Bazaar, Music Park, and even this version of Rainbow Road are all bangers in my opinion. In terms of the character roster, it introduced a few characters to the series such as Metal Mario, Lackey 2, Wiggler, and the Honey Queen for some reason. Wiggler is excellent, firstly because he's like my main character on any Mario Kart game he's in, and also watching him become angry is hilarious. Honey Queen is definitely a more confusing addition to the game. After originally appearing in Mario Galaxy, somebody at Nintendo just kind of decided to give her a driving license, not quite sure why that is. And meanwhile, Waluigi is absent. His own pinball course returns, but the man himself is nowhere to be seen. And thankfully in this game, the 3DS circle pad suits the handling well. Unlike F1, Mario Kart does not demand tiny steering corrections or careful throttle control. Its broad inputs and exaggerated physics feel much more natural to the handheld. And the frame rate is also stable, which should not feel like a luxury, but frequently does, especially when looking at games in this video. Now, in terms of critical response, Mario Kart 7 obviously reviewed very well, with an 85 out of 100 average and an 8.2 out of 10 for the user score. Mario Kart 7 will also become the best-selling game on the system, selling just shy of 19 million copies. Oh man, that's crazy. The only games that really came close were the Pokemon games that released for the system, and even then they were a couple of million shy. So for our final game, we are looking at Asphalt 3D, which is a conversion of one of the Asphalt mobile games. Now the 3DS actually does have a lot of mobile games on the console that have been ported to it, such as Cut the Rope, Doodle Jump, Angry Birds, and of course, Asphalt. So yeah, this was a launch title, so it released in March 2011 and was developed by Gameloft and published by Ubisoft. It had 42 licensed cars and motorbikes, 17 locations, multiple event types, vehicle upgrades, street pass features, and local multiplayer for up to 6 players. This does sound very substantial on paper. There's vehicles from Ferrari, Lamborghini, Audi. Locations include Tokyo, Las Vegas. Event types include standard races, time trials, drift competitions, and even police chases. There's an entire career mode in which I earn money, purchase vehicles, and improve their performance. On the back of the box, Asphalt 3D probably looked like one of the most exciting games in the launch lineup. Unfortunately though, the back of the box did not include a frame rate counter or functioning physics. So as I mentioned, Asphalt 3D is based very heavily on Asphalt 6, which was a mobile game on iOS, and that connection is obvious almost immediately. The menus, the progression structure, the event design, and general presentation feel like they were transferred from a smartphone and adjusted for an actual console. Now being based on a mobile game is definitely not a problem, because as I say, Angry Birds on the system, fantastic. Probably the best way to play Angry Birds today, to be honest. The Asphalt series became popular because it provided fast, accessible racing on hardware that didn't really have any alternatives. The issue is that Asphalt 3D was sold as a full-price retail game for a new console, so expectations were definitely higher. The handling initially seemed straightforward, steering can be responsive, drifting is triggered easily, and Nitrous provides a large speed boost. It's trying to create an exaggerated arcade experience somewhere between Burnout and Need for Speed, but none of the actual mechanics feel polished. Steering can be twitchy, especially with faster vehicles, and the car often moves without a convincing sense of weight. Drifting feels automated rather than earned whatsoever, with the vehicle rotating according to the game's animation instead of responding naturally to the corner. Collisions are insanely unpredictable, which is one of the most infuriating things that can happen in a racing game. Sometimes you can scrape against traffic without losing much speed, and other times touching a barrier can cause the car to completely come to a halt. It just doesn't really make any sense according to the game's own logic. And Asphalt 3D frequently struggles to maintain a smooth frame rate, which would already be a problem in an ordinary racing game, but it's especially damaging in something built around speed and something that's designed as a technical showcase for a new system. I have covered this game before in my 3DS mobile games video and have gone into this in a bit more depth, but I really do not like this game at all. Critical review scores would reflect this, with the game holding a 43 out of 100 on Metacritic with a user score of 5.1 out of 10. Interestingly though, the game would actually go on to sell pretty well, as apparently it sold just shy of 500,000 copies. Anyway, so that brings us to the end of our look at just some racing games for the Nintendo 3DS system. I am aware there are other racing games on the system such as Need for Speed, and if you'd like to see a follow-up video covering some of those, let me know in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap that bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is thank you and goodbye.